I run a company called ISET, for anyone who does PHP, which I guess you all do. That's kind of an inside joke. I'm a senior developer, and I'm an organizer of DDDNL. So I'm curious, hands up, how many of you have heard of DDD? A few of, well, hands, keep your hands up. So how many of you practice it during your actual day job? Okay. Well, lucky for you, today is not about DDD, so I won't bother you about that. I like to build stuff, and if you find, you can follow me on Twitter if you want to. So today, I told a little bit of a lie. Nowhere in my abstract was mentioned the word PHP. So I'm not going to talk about PHP today. I'm going to talk about anime. So, yeah. So those of you who don't know, anime is the romanticized or the westernized version of animation in Japanese. It's quite popular in Japan and around the world. And yeah. How many of you recognize some of these characters? Okay, good. Else it would have been a very bad talk. So, anime has a lot of genres it covers, a lot of grounds. Just in Hollywood, we have crime, we have humor, we have romance, all that stuff. Today I like to focus on one specific genre called shonen. And the kanji set is this, and shonen literally means boy, combined with cartoon or comic. So, in short, like a boys comic, right? So, boys comics or shonen in particular in Japan is a genre of, or a style of animation where there's a protagonist, usually a younger boy, that has to fight adversity, overcome hurdles, and grow in the process until at the end of the series, usually he finds the big boss and has to defeat him. It's kind of like an RPG, right? But then as a series. And in Hollywood, this is not a very famous genre, or it doesn't work like that most of the time. The closest I could get was Karate Kid, which most of you probably haven't seen, which is a testament to how old I am. Yeah, so that's bad. But in general, you could say that The Matrix is kind of shonen-like. There's a lot of fighting involved, usually. So some of the more famous shonen is Dragon Ball Z. Who has seen this or heard of this? Most of you. Okay, that's good. So another one is Naruto, One Piece, and more recently, Boku no Hero Academia, which roughly translates to My Hero Academy. And yes, that's a girl with a frog tongue, don't ask. So there's also, the title or the genre title is shonen, which is boys comic, but there's also female protagonists like this one. The series called Tora Kaguga no Railgun, or A Certain Scientific Railgun. And I only wanted to add this because I think this is one of the most amazing, cinematic things ever. So this is the female lead called Misako Mikoto, and she has the power to energize metal and then run a current through it. And if she does that with a coin, it looks kind of like this. Which is also why I like speaking, because you have to watch this. So there's two things to notice about shonen or anime. Usually it doesn't start out where the beginning or the protagonist fights the big boss immediately, right? Because that would look kind of like this. It's a little sad, right? And the second thing is the main protagonist is always surrounded by these people, supporters, right? As you saw in the previous slides, all the cast members, there's a big group of people who all help the main character develop and get better. Obviously, they help him, but they still have to do the training themselves, right? Like a lot of training is involved, and usually what happens, just like in RPGs, at some point, they get better at something, they level up, they unlock a new power, and oddly enough, all their hair color changes. I don't know why that is, but so in general, shonen category is usually defined as someone who keeps growing, keeps getting better and better, and then unlocking more and more powers, right? So If you relate this to, for instance, martial arts, usually this is not how we teach martial arts, right? Because, yeah, that would be bad. So usually if you wanted to learn martial arts, you start like this. You have to do a bunch of katas, the same mechanics over and over again until you process them or got them or are better at them. And in the end, you end up like with a black belt, usually. And then you have to find someone better to train you. So like a teacher or a sensei, right? And if the guy's any good and not a pervert, eventually you end up like enlightened. You become like the best thing ever. So the way we teach martial arts and the way shonen evolves is very similar, right? So from very tiny to very great. So how do we teach tech? So the best analogy I could find to teach tech is this. So let's say we want to draw an owl. So we draw 2 circles, right? And then the next step is this. Which is kind of insane to me. This is how we teach tech in general. If you look at all the resources available, there's plenty of resources to teach you this, right? Then there's nothing, and then there's a lot of resources that teach you this. And there's nothing in between, which is weird to me. Secondly, what's weird to me is every one of us has good and bad things, right? We're good and bad at different things. So we have like different skill sets. Again, like in RPGs, we have different skill distribution of our points. So this is Gohan, and this is Nappa, who has, a little bit, and this is like Uber Boss Goku. So they all have like things they're good at, things they're bad at. Yet our entire way of teaching things is basically like this. So we have a bunch of different people or animals, and we say, well, let's make it fair. Everybody has to climb the tree, which, if you're an elephant, it's kind of hard. Or a penguin. Or a fish. So yeah. So this is weird to me, right? And this is most exemplified by if you just start out, like forget everything you know now. You just have to start from the scratch now and you want to be a programmer. So this is more or less what you all have to know. So you have to know HTML5, CSS, JavaScript, some framework in JavaScript, so Angular, Vue.js, React, whatever. Then you need some scripting language like PHP or Ruby, Python. Well, Java is not really a scripting language, but whatever. And you need to learn Git. Now, you would think, well, that's a bunch of stuff, but you're not done. Because you have to think about, hey, how do I set up an environment? Docker. But then we have Docker Swarm, Kubernetes, all Rancher, all that stuff. Then how do I deploy my site? Where do I deploy it to? To the cloud, right? How do I build my site? Build tools, all the grunts, Webpack, all that stuff. Cloud in general. And most importantly, when do I start with using blockchain, right? That's the most important question. So to me, it kind of feels like if you want to get into the software industry, it feels a little bit like this. So everything is on fire, you're alone, defending your little city, and you have to fight like this giant-ass monster that tells you, well, you also have to learn this, and you also have to learn this. So yeah, that's pretty bad to me, anyway. But usually, most of us, so how many of you had an actual formal education in the software industry? So anything related to programming? So few hands. Yeah, so this is common in PHP, right? Most of us don't start with an actual programming education. We just started somewhere, usually like this. This is how we started to learn, and we thought, well, I can do this. And then you press F5 and it works, and you feel like this, right? Like, I am a god amongst men. Until you encounter this one and you're like, I know nothing. My life is a failure, everything is a lie. And you feel sad for a little while. But, we watch a bunch of movies and then we watch Batman and it says, why do we fall? So we can learn to pick ourselves up and then we try again. So step by step, we learn a little bit more, we find a little bit more until we, finish a new thing for us and then, yay, we're God again. And then it starts all over again. And it usually starts with questions, right? Like a bunch of questions we have. And where do we ask those questions? Well, we can ask them to our colleagues, but they usually either are very judgmental or they're not very helpful or they give the wrong answer. Or we go on Slack and then people give you answers to questions you didn't ask, which is also kind of sad. So eventually you end up here, right? So the thing about Stack Overflow and the way it, interacts with people is it doesn't really care if you're, just starting out or if you're like in full-on Super Saiyan mode, which I want to illustrate with an example. So this is taken from Stack Overflow. This is the topic to show you that there are 3 replies on one question. I will go into them. So the question is, add a number to another number in JavaScript. Now, hopefully you know a little bit of JavaScript. So it goes like this. Hello. That's always nice, right? Start with a greeting. I have got a number in my JavaScript variable. Sounds good, right? Now the question is, now how do I add another number to it? And he leads out with please. So very, very thankful person, right? Now the obvious question is downvoted, obviously, -2. To add numbers together, you should use the plus operator. I mean, obviously that's wrong, right? There's no mention of blockchain anywhere. This is wrong. So he gives an example. For A is 1, for B is A plus 2, alert B, and then you get 3. Wrong answer. Now the right answer is this one, right? You should definitely use jQuery. I mean, the guy's not wrong. So he goes on, it's really great and does all the things. So the second answer to that is, I agree. jQuery is really the best. It solves all kinds of browser problems and is good as well. That's always nice to have reiteration. And then the last one is, this is my favorite, +1, jQuery is best quality ever. If you don't use, you're an idiot. Mind you, this is not photoshopped. This is actual, this is on Stack Overflow, you can find it. So yeah, but there was another answer, right? So there's always like a median answer, an answer in between. So let's see what they say. So I think there's a jQuery plugin for that. Mind you, Google for jQuery basic arithmetic. So this guy figured out this is a basic arithmetic operator. So let's use a library for that. And this is how we get left bad, right? So the answer to that is, yeah. You're spoiling my joke. So jQuery is definitely the way to go. And then the last one, I love this one. I used the jQuery diet plugin and lost 10 kilograms in a week. Yeah. So is Stack Overflow the best way to learn how to program? It's my question. So the reason for this is kind of like, if you start out programming, you basically just want an answer. And if the answer is jQuery, fine, that's fine, right? You don't really care about, design patterns, and you don't really care about like security and all that stuff. You just want an answer that works because you want to feel like a god again. So this is best illustrated with this, right? So you have a triangle, and you have to calculate x, and then you say, well, there it is. This is the type of answer we look for when we do, as a junior, right? As we start out. And then as we develop more and more and grow more, it's more like this, where we have like an inception matrix kind of feel, where we're like, okay, so we add this one, do an arithmetic operator, and then we add this one, and then and you get like these diagrams, a bunch of UML, very cool. But this is more focused on like an implementation, right? Can we add some abstraction layers? Do we have to solve it here, or can we do it in an abstraction layer higher or lower, et cetera, et cetera. And then as we grow even further, we actually don't care about the implementation at all, right? We just care about, is this actually worth solving? Is this actually a problem we have? Why are we solving it, right? And what are the options we have? Do we need to do it x plus y? Can we do y plus x? Who is x? Why is x? Et cetera, right? So this kind of parallels to the way we approach problem solving. So, the stages of problem solving. First one, I just want to solve my problem, right? I hope everyone knows this. So this isn't if you're a senior, like if you have no knowledge of a topic, this is usually how you go about your business. So if you have to install, for instance, an ELK stack, but you've never worked with ELK, you're like, okay, let's install some stuff. F5. Doesn't work. Change the config, F5. Still doesn't work. To Stack Overflow. Ah, I needed to add jQuery. And then you add jQuery and it works, right? So this is usually how you do something where the domain is unknown to you. And then the second part is when you're more familiar with a topic, know more about the subject, etc., you go into, I want to understand my problem. I want to know what it actually is I'm trying to solve, right? So you go like a layer deeper, in a sense. And you're more interested in, like, the problem is solvable, but you're more interested in, like, which option of the different design patterns I could use. And then the last one is more like if you're more senior, then you're more into the mode, okay, we have like 7 different options. Which of those options, what are the trade-offs? Which of those options should we use now because we have this and this use case? So you think way more about context and you think about trade-offs, stuff like that, because context matters, right? So this is one of the biggest problems that we see in open places like Stack Overflow or Slack or any of the other forums that people use when you try and explain a problem. And you see it a lot at meetups and at conferences as well. So the context of where you're in right now or where you're coming from is very important in how you try and explain something to someone else, right? I have a better example of that further on. And the context can also change depending on a few metrics. So for instance, knowledge. How much do I actually know about the subject? If you know a lot, I mean, you can skip certain steps. If you know very little, you have to start like at the beginning, right? Then experience. Experience in general. So like you might not know how an elk stack works, but you know how a distributed logging system works, so they're kind of similar, so you can draw parallels, and then you know a little bit more about it, etc., right? So experience gives you some leeway where you can go faster into an unknown territory, right? Then there's a time constraint. Is this some hobby project and I just do it for fun, for shits and giggles, try to figure something out? Or is there a deadline? Because if there's a deadline, you probably just want it to work. You don't really care how it works, and you don't care about options. You just want it to work, right? Then there's pressure, right? Are people depending on it? This is different than a deadline. Like, it might be that you're in a project where there's actually no deadline, but other teams are waiting for you to finish something. And the last is interest. So I've seen many people going like on a bike shed course just because they had to solve one little thing, and they're like, oh, this is an interesting problem, and then they're rewriting the kernel because why not? So, but if you don't care about the subject, you probably won't ever do a deep dive, right? So for instance, I'm not that interested in logging, so I have no clue how it works, I just want it to work. So given these constraints, I came up with this highly scientific matrix, which looks like this. So if you have no knowledge, you usually just want to solve your problem. If you have some knowledge, you want to understand the problem. And if you have a lot of knowledge, you just want the options for this. So let's give an example of this. So let's say we're a junior developer, we're just starting out in a company. And we wrote a little bit of code, but sometimes it breaks, which is annoying, right? So we have an example class, and we do something, and then we do something that sometimes fails. Who does not understand this code? Because else this is going to be a very long exercise. Okay. So we have John Doe, our junior developer, and he says, well, whenever it breaks, I want it to write to a log. Sounds reasonable, right? So John Doe speaks to Sansa Stark, our senior developer, and she says, oh, you want to log something? That's great. So have you thought about using Elk, Syslog, Splunk, or Kafka? And the junior goes, what? And then starts Googling and reads about eventual consistency and Kafka's partition errors that you can have, that Splunk is extremely expensive, that Elk suddenly requires Docker to run, and Syslog is usually best not used for application logging. And like a week later, he goes back to like, I have no idea what I should do, right? So here we have a mismatch. So Sansa is talking about a position of, I'll give you options and I can explore them with you, right? The junior is in the context of, I just want a log, right? I just want to write something to a log file. So In general, you can say this miscommunications happens a lot, and just asking what the context is, what are you trying to achieve, usually solves this. If sensor has asked, like, what are you trying to do, and you would have said, well, I just want to write something to a file so I can check it, this would not have been, her answer would not have been, well, have you tried Kafka yet? So this I see go wrong a lot. So context is very important. So a tip. Whenever you're dealing in this kind of situation, make sure that whatever junior developer is coming to you has a moment of like the God mode again. So make him do something that gives him instant gratification, instant result. So he is on his way to getting to Kafka or whatever else you do. So Arjundo asks a little bit around, and he learns about, whenever something goes wrong, you can catch that and then, do something with that. So he goes on. So we have do something that sometimes fails. He learns about the try-catch block, and now since PHP 7 we can have a generic throwable. So whatever exception gets thrown, we can catch. And then we write it to a file, right? Best logger ever. Who's written this piece of code? None of you? You liars. Everybody's written this piece of code. Well, I have anyway. So yeah, problem solved, right? Okay. So he puts it in he checks it in Git or whatever source control you use, and obviously it's a company that's been around, so they have a code review step. So let me introduce you to Alice. And Alice is the code reviewer. And she said, well, what if we want to change the location of the file? So this is very important. Instead of telling the junior you're doing it wrong, right? She just asked the question. So this is one of the best tools you have as a senior to help mediators or juniors. Just ask the question, what if this or what if that, right? So what if you want to change the location? So code reviews in general are very powerful. I think my previous speaker had an entire talk about this. I won't go too deep into it. I just want to say this. So as a senior, a code review can be very helpful to juniors because you can ask what if, right? Perfect learning moments. What if this? What if that? What if edge case, right? And vice versa, if you have a junior that asks a code review, he can ask why. Why are we doing it this way, right? And that has two benefits. So why is a learning experience, right? So you can explain, well, because this and this and this. Or it could be, if the answer is we've always done it this way, there might be like an optimization step there. Because a fresh set of eyes usually ask questions that other people don't ask because they take it for granted. So a tip is always make juniors part of your code review process. So the code review. So our John Doe thinks, well, we can config that using an environment, because everybody uses environment variables these days. Configs are out, environments are in. So he says, well, let's change it to an environment variable, right? So this is better, obviously, because we change it, but now we are dependent on some global state, right? Some global mutable state even. So which can be pretty bad. If someone else in the team decides to just change it or remove it, we have a problem. So Alice goes back and says, well, this is much better. So this is positive reinforcement, right? Say, hey, you have made a tiny step. You're now from A to B, right? But global variables can be tricky, and that explains why global variables are tricky. Hopefully I don't have to explain it to you all. If I do, come after the talk. So this reaffirms the progress, and we can, again, a moment of teaching. So now we can talk about dependency injection and etc., right? So with our newfound knowledge, we have a new pull request or a new code review where we have a string of the location where we store the file here, right? Pretty good so far. Anyone not following? Okay. So Alice goes on, well, what if you want to log to something else in a file? Right? Because we're kind of tied up now to our file put contents thing. So next step goes, well, we tell about interfaces, multiple implementations, etc., etc. We come up with this. So we build a logger interface, and we say, well, you can log it. And then we have an implementation called a file logger. using the same dependency injection. So we have the path to log file, and then we basically copy paste the file, put contents here. And now if you, for instance, want to log to a database, we can by making a database logger, or to Redis if we want an in-memory logger, or whatever where you want to log to, right? And our simple example class just changed the dependency to logger because we need a logger now, and that's it. And then epiphany, Alice says, well, this is a very nice interface, pretty nice logger, but did you know there was a standard for this, right? It's like, oh man, could have you told me from the beginning, right? I mean, that's kind of mean of Alice, right? But I mean, this is, you know, baby steps. This is how people learn. And this is like someone understands why this is there now, because he made it himself. Just like, this is useful. So now we have a generic way of doing this. So we take our PSR, logger interface, and then, you know, obviously we can't call log anymore because that's not on the interface, but we call it an error, which is actually is, so sounds a lot better, right? So in general, this is nicer. And then we talk about, to John, and say, well, the logging part of your code is actually not part of the behavior of the class it's in, right? We only want to log it if something goes wrong. But the general class, you know, doesn't really need a logger. So one of the rules is when you do a dependency injection is whatever you inject is actually used by the class, because else it's, you know, not right, not on the right position. So she goes, do you know about decorators? So and we can again explain why decorators are good, whether, you know, when you can use them, and we have an example. So we have an interface for do something, we do something. Very hard interface. And then we have a decorator, so we have a loggable example, which takes an example and a logger, and then whenever something goes wrong, the decorator takes care of the logging part. Which means that our original code is basically the same as what we started with. And the junior goes, well, I had that like from the beginning. Why wasn't that good enough, right? So the thing is, though, we've took this junior from like one code review into a journey and, you know, explained basically everything he needs to know to do this correctly the next time, right? So just one code review, one piece of code. So we explained why global variable state is bad, why dependency injection is considered good, right? Why interfaces are considered good, why single responsibility is good, and why decorators are useful sometimes, depending on the use case. So this is like very simple rules, but this is how powerful a code review can be instead of, hey, this is wrong, or hey, this is bad, right? So do we have other teaching opportunities or learning opportunities? Well, obviously we have books. We still have books, right? Everybody loves books. So obviously you can still learn from books. There's a very good site called DevBooks. This lists all the most advised books on Stack Overflow. So whenever a book is mentioned the most, it gets higher on the list. And for your reference, Working Effectively with Legacy Code is by far the highest ranked on that, which says a lot about our industry as a whole, I think. But yeah, there's a very good list on this site, which you can read. Now, another one is pair programming, right? So we can do pair programming. We can do the exact same steps. Again, we can have a senior do the programming and a junior watching and asking why, right? Why are you doing this? And vice versa, we can have a junior telling step by step what is thought process in, and not interject, but say, well, asking questions. Have you considered this? Have you considered that? So a tip would be, if you have juniors on your team, always do pair programming with a junior and a senior, if you do it as a teaching exercise, right? So the next one I want to talk about is meetups. You can learn a lot, or get a lot of help out of meetups, right? But what you usually see on meetups is if you go with some people, you only stick with the people you are with and not like explore outside of that. So I would recommend using the Pac-Man rule, which basically says whenever you're in a group, you always leave one spot open so people can just step into the circle and ask, because it's very threatening. It's very hard to get into a conversation if there's a circle and nobody's looking at you, right? But if you have a little bit of space open, people can just step in and say, hey, I want to know more about this. Can you tell me more? Or I know about this. I've heard this before, right? And obviously, when someone gets put or added to the group, you know, make a new Pac-Man because else it's not that useful. Another very good way to do this is event storming. So event storming is a workshop format where you just stick a lot of stickies everywhere, basically. It's often described as a deliberate learning experience. So basically, you take the time to actually know the process you're trying to model or trying to do. And in that is very powerful because you can have people there like with fresh insights, not only programmers, but business people as well, and they sometimes teach you stuff that you didn't even know, like why the company does certain things that way, et cetera, et cetera. So how many of you have ever done an event storming session? Just a few, okay. So I would really recommend like looking it up. The guy in the middle, Brandolini, he's Italian, so another reason why you should do it, I guess. He's the inventor of the format, and I mean, it's very powerful stuff. So next one is obviously conferences. You're at one. So raise of hands. How many of you consider yourself to be seniors? Okay. We'll get back to that. So the same goes in conferences. You can go up to speakers and ask them, hey, I want to know a little bit more about them. You can, you know, again, use Pac-Man, talk to each other, figure out. But I would say the most important thing is step out of your comfort zone and just talk to people because, I mean, you're in a unique position where all the people here are here for the same subject, PHP. So everybody here is interested in learning about PHP, I would say. Well, unless you're still here from the JavaScript conference. And then there's a kind of masochistic one, is then become a speaker, and then you're on stage, and people look at you, and you're like, why are they looking at me like that? So yeah, but honestly, speaking at conferences is a great way to start learning about stuff, because you have to actually know something to get on stage. Some do anyway. So another way you can do this is popularized by Matthias Frost. It's called small controlled experiments. And it's a format where you and your team, anyone in your team can put an idea up. So say, hey, let's try this, right? So what you do is, without questions asked, you do that for a sprint or a week or a month, whatever whenever you figure out with your team what you want to do. And then after that period, you have an evaluation moment. Was it good? Was it bad? Was it decent, right? So if it's good, it stays. If it's bad, it goes to like the discard pile. And if it's in the middle, it also goes to the discard pile. The discard pile means you do it another sprint. And if after that people still don't say it's good, you discard the idea. So one of the reasons why this is very powerful, this is kind of the same as with the Google Fridays, where they could basically do whatever they wanted. And we got Gmail and all that good stuff. Small controlled experiments usually make tiny little improvements to the process, either development, either process management, either story-wise, whatever. But over a period of time, if you keep adding good stuff to it, it basically radically makes everything better. And it's just as simple as, hey, what if we, instead of doing stand-ups in the morning, we do stand-ups at the end of the day? Because, I don't know, John is always late, Samantha has to drop her kid at school, right? But if you do it at the end of the day, everyone is there, et cetera, right? So a very small change. Because, I mean, the impact of moving the meeting, the stand-up from the morning to the afternoon is very small, but it could be a gigantic improvement for the people who actually count on, bringing their kids to school, etc. So this is very powerful stuff. I would definitely recommend it. Now, one of the problems we have as a software industry is that we always think in absolutes, right? There's always one way, there's always the way, etc., etc. So I would caution against that. So everything I say, try it. If it works for you, do it. If it doesn't work for you, like, don't do it. Don't do it because I said so or someone else said so. So the same goes for design patterns, which I always call design pattern-itis. It's like, if you know all the design patterns, that doesn't make you a good programmer, right? Or a good software architect. I mean, knowing when to apply them and when not to apply them is way more valuable than knowing them by heart. I mean, you can look up the patterns, but you cannot look up when you should and shouldn't apply them in your project. There's general guidelines, but sometimes it's okay to deviate from the guidelines, or even sometimes it's better to deviate from it. And it boils down to this. So the yellow line is how much you think you know. The green line is how much you realize you still have to learn, and the blue line is how much you actually know, right? And I'm being reminded of this daily, because every time I think I know something, I discover that I don't know anything at all. So, and partly that's because of this, right? And this is how real life goes. This is how we learn. We don't learn in a straight line. We make, side roads and turnabouts, etc., etc. So why is this all important? Why is it important that we teach tech, I would say, in my way, the correct way? So I'm haunted by this quote by Uncle Bob. So the number of programmers doubles every 5 years, right? That means at any time, half the world programmers have less than 5-year experience. So if your company or you are ever imagining, why can't we get senior developers? Where are all the senior developers? That's because of this. There's not less senior developers, there's just exponentially more juniors, right? So it's like fishing in a pond where we keep adding juniors to, and we have like 1 or 2 seniors every, cycle. So in order to break from this, if you want to have a senior development team, if you want to have a senior development company, there's only one way, and this is train them yourself, right? Teach them yourself. Make juniors meteors, make the meteors seniors, etc., etc. So, in my opinion, the way we should teach tech is this. So people learn the best one step at a time. Find opportunities to learn and teach, right? So it can be in a code review, it could be in pair programming, etc., etc. Find mentors or mentees. Find an old dude, a wise dude that can teach you how to fly. Create your own senior, so, take time to teach people around you, your team members, or learn from your team members. And never stop learning, because after doing this 20 years, I still have no clue what I'm doing. And if you do that, you're gonna be A-okay. Thank you, that was my talk.